Okay, so this is a simple tutorial in Revit covering the creation of what I would call a three-dimensional curvilinear roof. So not a simple curve, not a two-dimensional curve, but a three-dimensional curve. And there's several ways to do this in Revit. One of the best ways I think to do this is using the component model in place and custom massing tool set with three-dimensional splines. So that's what I'm going to walk through, and then we'll be converting that massing form to a roof by face. So in the conceptual mass setup inside of Revit, it works different than the generic component or anything else. We have more complex ways that we can build forms. So a lot of times these are really interesting pieces to begin building with. So this is a basic layout of a student design that was looking at a tutorial in terms of how to build a more complicated roof shape. Sort of one roof that sweeps in this way and another roof that sweeps in underneath that. So let's just build those two forms really quick. And so I've got the, I'm inside of the, well, let's just back out really quick. So I'm stepping through each piece one at a time. So I'm going architecture, component, model in place, and I am selecting mass as my category. Because again, what this does, this opens up a slightly different set of tools with a few more options. And again, this is just sort of the basic look at how it's going to work. But one of my favorite tools in this set is definitely the three-dimensional spline, or a spline through 3 points, or what is referred to exactly. Creates a 3D spline that passes through 3D points. Okay, so I'm going to do an edge. So this will end up being sort of the edge of my roof. And so notice that that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. I'm going to do the outside edge, the other outside edge. And again, I'm not looking at making this symmetrical, but I am looking at making this form balanced. And just to help the computer out, help it sort of process what the potential of these points are going to be. You notice I'm using the same number of points each side. Similar location, which is relevant, but not everything. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points on each side. And now I'm going to do another set of points right along the central axis. Again, thinking about being balanced in terms of number of points where they're located, but not perfectly symmetrical, because I kind of want these points to ride and make this sort of interesting curvilinear form. And the goal is for those to start on the ground plane, this side, become at their highest right here through the middle, and then end up somewhat vertical on this edge. So I'm going to start with those sort of higher points. And so if I select any point along that spline, I have these axes to work with, and I'm just going to start pulling that up. I can check the height that's going up pretty easily simply by navigating to an elevation view from my axonometric 3D view. So I know I'm approximately 20 feet vertical right now with that. So let's raise these points up to sort of smooth that curve out. This point I want to end up, you know, right around 12 feet or so. So I'm going to come up just above that. Let's bring this point in line. And let's bring this point up. And you can see as I move those points, it's affecting the curve in 3 dimensions, right? So if I were to pull this point way up, you can sort of see the response that that curve has in every direction, which is pretty darn cool. Okay, so that is the outer edge, and I can continue to edit and refine those, get that curve doing sort of exactly what I want. And I also always encourage students, don't be afraid to delete your line and try again if it gets out of control, right? It takes a little bit of practice to sort of know how the spline is going to react to how I'm moving it. And sometimes you just can't edit that curve into existence. Sometimes you just gotta scrap it and start over. And that is perfectly okay. Because regardless, I mean, we're playing with forms, playing with designs, right? So let's go ahead and pull the rest of those up. And again, navigating in 3D, I'm building a 3D object. This is why 3D views exist. So really leverage what they're the best at. Just a subtle reminder in Revit, if I'm having trouble selecting a point, that tab key is always your friend. And even then, if the tab key is not working well for you, often you need to switch to a wireframe view as well in terms of selecting some of these forms. Let's pull that down just a little bit. So I've got those two edges. And so if I built this form right now, I would have a strong edge and a strong edge. But it would kind of do a little bit of an arc between these probably. But I can also define this center line as the center point or the central axis of my curve. Oh, and that's interesting. See, it's that point right there is sort of on that plane. It's actually locked to that. I accidentally clicked on that curve. So to move that, I believe I'm going to need to turn on disjoin. Wow, that just doesn't want to be a good point for me at all. Let's just delete it. And we'll let the computer make that decision for me. So I want that one to be just a little bit more vertical. I'd like the center part of this roof to be up just a little bit higher than the edges. And so this certainly requires a little bit of imagination in terms of what you're building, but I'm building the guide wires. I'm building the edges for what I want this roof form to become. Okay, so from this point, I'm going to select the line. I'm going to control click the next line and my next edge. Then I'm going to click create form, and that's going to build my mass. Then I can say finish mass. Get that little warning message if you don't have mass turned on yet in your viewing properties. It's going to pop up that warning, which is totally okay. And then I'm going to use architecture, roof by face to select my mass and create the roof. So that has now created a solid geometry with all the properties of a building information modeling roof. And that was created as a 12-inch generic roof. So I could switch that to any roof type or any custom roof type that I'm sort of working through on that. But perfectly happy with the generic 12-inch roof for right now. Now, one of the important things to note is that I do have two forms in the same place at the same time. So you do get these sort of weird visual errors from the coplanar geometry. So one of the things that I'm typically in the habit of doing is I will select that massing form. So I'm going to use the tab key again, select the mass. That was the roof, Dave. Let's select just the mass. There it is. So tab, get the correct selection. Select mass, and then in this view, I will right-click, hide in view element. Do not delete it. Deleting it is bad. It's not going to break your geometry, but it's going to ruin the opportunity for you to edit the geometry. Okay, so let's make one more form, and then we'll look at editing that as well. So same steps. I'm going to go back to my level 1. I notice I'm drawing this, so I'm going to make this other form that sort of sweeps underneath that previous one. I definitely don't want to be doing this from the site view. So my site view over the top, if I click that 3D spline anywhere on that roof, it is going to lock that point to the top of the roof. And starting with a spline attached to an object, as you notice I had to delete one of those points off that circle to move it, can make things just a little bit trickier to work with as you're learning this tool set. So navigating to level 1 is going to lock my points, that initial click, on my level 1 ground plane. So let's go back to those steps one more time. So component, model in place, mass, and OK. 3D spline. So let's select our edges. So that's outside edge of roof 1. outside edge of roof 2. My next piece is that central spline, or I think I said spline, but the central spine that runs through, that's going to allow me to move that portion of the roof vertically up and down. Okay, so I'm going to take this line. This time I'm going to do something just a little bit different. I'm going to start with those. Moving up, let's move that entire edge spline to 10 feet. Let's move this spline, the other outside edge. I'm going to move it up to 10 feet. And that's sort of my baseline height. And let's move that center one up 14 feet. So now I have sort of a good Z starting height. So from here, I can take this and begin making sort of these subtle shifts up and down. I want this one to sort of sweep underneath. Let's pull that down just a little bit. And this edge back up. Super happy with that. I'm going to pull this one down. This edge down, so this roof is starting really low to the ground, working its way up and underneath this other roof canopy. And then sort of working its way back down closer to the ground again. So then my center axis, which is already a little bit higher vertically, just continue to sort of move those points up. And up. And then down. I'm going to bring this point again almost all the way down to the ground plane. Which, when it rains, is going to make a really nice, fascinating river right there. Okay, so let's go select, 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 create form. Oh, that's a really good error message to have in the video. Unable to create form, self-intersecting, or singular geometry would result. Okay, and what that's saying is that the geometry is sort of overlapping in on itself. And my guess, just kind of look at what's happening with this. My guess is it really probably is this location right here where that curve is too extreme to build. And so let's just hope that by pulling this down and pulling this down, by normalizing that form just a little bit, that we're actually able to build this. And if I get that error message again, I'll actually take a step back and start over. Yeah, no, that was, essentially I had a form that was curling back in on itself. Oh, and it's still doing it here too. It's actually seaming those together in the wrong order, which is kind of terrible. So let's try making sure that I was selecting those in the correct order. Create form. Yeah, no, it's still doing some weird stuff for me. So let's actually delete that center line. Let's do a quick test here and build that form. So when I mentioned, hey, don't be afraid of deleting and trying again, I'm just putting that into action. I'm going to Control Z and undo. And let's look at this from the site plan view just to see where I'm going. I'm going to set my view to wireframe so I can see underneath everything. And let's rebuild that center spline. And as I mentioned, we want to make sure that I'm not snapping to a point across the middle. So this is kind of a fun accident to have here for sure. And we'll see. I'm hoping that because I'm in wireframe view, that I'm not going to get sort of those snaps up off the XY plane NIM. Now I'm just going to hope that I can actually grab those and manipulate them where I want them to go. And so what I'm going to do, I should be able to select those. I really need to be able to move those around. This is a little bit more advanced mode of thinking that I didn't want to touch on. Essentially, I'm saying I don't want that hosted anymore, right? So I should be able to move that underneath. There we go. That's much better. And my host, I'm going to move that underneath so that I have control over those specific points. Essentially, you know, when you snap to something in Revit, it's going to assume, oh, those two things are connected. You always want them to be connected forever and ever. And in this case, I really didn't want that. What I was looking for is those to be on the ground plane and be able to move them up. So let's hope here, in terms of recreating this, that I actually have that massing form not sort of wrapping around in itself again. That would be great. There might be a method inside of Revit that lets you control what is attached to what first. But to be clear, I'm not sure how to get to that option. So we're just going to delete. Let's rebuild. And let's see if that makes a more rational form. Still having that issue. Wow. So let's look at one other method. Let's delete that spline. Let's select those 2 points and let's create it. So we have this as a massing object, but as mentioned, it doesn't have that sort of central arc. This is almost more of a two-dimensional ribbon. I should be able to select that and turn on X-ray. And I should be able to add a few edges that are going to allow me a little bit more control across the axis. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's put one here and here. Again, this really was outside of the plan of what this video was about as well. But you know, sometimes you just got to figure things out. So now I have a few of these additional pieces here, and I should be able to come in, place some additional points, and then I should be able to move those points vertically. Total failure. So I'm able to edit that. Wow, but check that out. That's like segment. It's actually kind of cool, but not what I'm going for. For certain, not what I'm going for. Undo, 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 undo. The making of videos in Revit. Brutal. Undo all that stuff. Let's delete that, and let's go back to work. So I'm starting from scratch for sure. And let's do another 3D spline. And I'm going to try and minimize the number of points here. And you know, the other thing that I mentioned doing in the first one that I built was keeping the same number of points on your edges. 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, like this can be very helpful. And sometimes, you know, in some softwares, the order that you draw the splines in matters as well. Which I wouldn't think that that would be the case here, but you never know. That might be what I need to move through and do also. So let's look at this again. So I've got those 3 points. Let's look at my basic modifications again. So let's select all those lines. Let's move them up 10 feet. I'm going to select my center line. And I'm going to move it up 4 feet. Then I'm going to start making my modifications. I'll make fewer modifications so you're not just sitting here watching me move points around. Because if this fails, you know, well, then I'm going to have to scrap the video and start all over again, which is totally cool. I don't mind doing that. But let's get just a few more basic modifications in so we can see how this is working. You know, it's like almost predestined for that to fail, because I mentioned don't be afraid to delete and start over. And that sort of set the whole thing up for it to fail and we have to delete and start over. Okay, so new sweeping roof form, selecting 1, 2, 3 lines, create form, and it's still folding that ribbon over in a really crazy way. That is just so fascinating. So give me 1 second here to see if we can't go to X-ray mode and get a better understanding of why those points are editing the way that they are. So what I'm trying to do here is that, you know, this little piece that I'm working with are essentially the edge pieces. And, you know, again, some software, and I have not experimented with this at all in Revit, but, you know, some softwares will tell you what the order of those points are, right? And that's sort of what I'm doing right here by selecting and manipulating those points around. But wow, that's just something that I wasn't really prepared to talk about in this particular assignment and in this particular student's project. So it's sort of a weird conundrum to be dealing with right here. But I'm using those points to kind of manipulate that overall piece and start pulling some of those things around to reform. So you can see this arc right here is setting up the arc of that roof and where it's at, and how each one of those splines relates to the other. And so I'm really just using this X-ray mode that I've turned on to kind of rework exactly what's happening with that spline. And you know, the other way that I could have worked to create this, and I think a lot of what is happening with this, why it's forming the way it is, probably has a lot to do with the bend that I have in this as well, that the software is just sort of making some wrong assumptions for me. So I certainly could build this roof sort of in 2 pieces and simplify that form down a little bit. But I really have that sort of reshaped into my initial intent simply by leveraging this X-ray mode and sort of moving some of those things around to reshape this roof form. Getting pretty happy with it now, actually. And so I think I'm going to accept that as sort of my default. So let's go finish mass. And so I'm back into my overall Revit project, architecture, roof, roof by face, select that, and create roof. So again, I have that sort of weird geometry problem. But I'm going to select, well, I shouldn't say geometry problem, but weird representation problem. But I can hide and view that element temporarily. And you can start to see that those things are now working together in a really nice kind of way. So I think where I wanted to go next with this is how to edit these forms, because you can see, like, formally speaking, as a designer, those 2 roofs, they're just way too close together. So how I would start editing those forms, like let's take this roof right here, especially since it was a little more willing to be worked with. I'm going to increase that slope and sweep to provide a little bit of additional separation between those 2 roof forms. So to do that, first I need to unhide that overall massing form that was right there. So I'm going to select my light bulb. I'm going to select the top massing object, and I'm going to go edit in place. And that is something the likes of which I have never seen before. So let's go cancel mass. That was really, really exceptionally exciting. Let's go unhide and view elements. And let's do that from here. I'm going to select that massing object again, edit in place. And now I am ready to select that overall mass form. And again, one of the best editing methods is using that X-ray. So with that X-ray turned on, and let's switch this to wireframe just so it's a little bit easier to see. Again, I can see these different points that I can start manipulating. So I can pull that center spine up quite a bit more. And I'm going to do the same thing with these edges. Let's pull them up and up and up. So you can start to see I'm building a much more dramatic separation between roof form and roof form. That's what I had. This is what I'm moving up to. With the design idea that, I can open up one roof, I can open up the lower roof to the roof above, I can start sneaking in some clear story glazing between these forms and sort of make it a really interesting space between these two roofs. At least I think that's what the student's design intent is. Cool, so I've reshaped that. If you notice, it's almost making too heavy of a tail right here. So I might take each one of these points and kind of gracefully work that spline back up so I'm not sort of dipping underground with each one of those. Cool. Finished mass. Now I'm back in my overall Revit file, and to get this back to this without having to recreate it each time, there's a button for that. I can select my initial roof. Let's change this back to hidden lines so we can see what's happening just a little bit better. I can select my initial roof. It knows it was updated with this face, so I can just go update to face, and I've got those two things connected back together. So in my shaded view, you can see what I'm starting to build in terms of the interaction between those two roofs. Very cool stuff.